Mary Lee, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You would eventually, you would get your start in New York City. That's where you kind of began to ply your trade when you decided it was time to do so. But you grew up in Michigan
I did.
originally.
I
Where
did.
did you grow up in Michigan, and what did music look like around your household growing up?
I grew up in a town of about 2,000 people called Portland, which
Mhm.
is right in the middle of the state. And I don't know if you are aware of the fact that Michigan is shaped like a mitten.
Fair enough, I
But
do.
okay, but actually, not everybody knows that. And when you grow up in Michigan, from the time you can conceive of anything, you realize that you're told and you realize I'm growing up in a state that's shaped like a mitten. And you think that's really cool. And whenever you travel around the state, or meet people from other towns, they say, "Oh, where's Portland?" And you hold up your hand and you point, "Oh, it's right there." "Oh, where's Ludington?" "Oh," and you point up there. So it was kind of a rude awakening when I moved to New York City and people asked me where I was from. And I
Right,
said, "Portland, Michigan." And they said, "Where's that?" And I went here. And they said, "Why are you pointing at your hand?"
right, right.
Because not everybody actually knows that. Not everyone is born and raised thinking about the fact that Michigan is shaped like a mitten.
Well,
But
yeah, and 2,000 people, that's pretty small. Portland, it's not even the second most significant Portland in the United States.
correct.
It's what was it like growing up in a town of 2,000 people? What was the culture like there growing up?
Well, it was, I didn't have anything to compare it to. I really look back on it with great fondness now. Um, I always felt like I wanted to live, move and live somewhere else eventually. But it was wonderful, and I was very lucky because I grew up with a very musical grandmother,
Hmm.
and so I used to go to her house, and she played piano, and she had a Hammond A100 organ.
What is that?
Oh, it's just this beautiful old organ with a lot of different settings and
Hmm.
foot pedals, and she was amazing. And so she would play all this music and a lot of songs from the classic American songbook.
Wow.
So I grew up listening to George Gershwin and Cole Porter at my grandmother's fingertips. And some other lesser known people as well. But I would skip in circles for what felt like hours and hours to me while she would play the organ and play these wonderful songs and change the settings in between songs. So I had that as kind of a basis. And the other wonderful thing about living in a town that small is I happened to live right next door to the piano teacher, the one piano teacher named Florence Dunham. So I started taking piano lessons and voice lessons from her when I was in about fourth grade.
Wow. I mean, are you able to look back now and realize what an absolute gift that is to be able to get the American Songbook from your grandmother? I mean, that's something that I don't even think exists for many kids now at all these days. It's kind of like
Right.
a wrinkle in time that you were able to get.
Exactly. And I think I didn't even think about this much till recently, but I think it really informed my songwriting because I noticed that I've had sort of a quirk in my songwriting. I don't like inexact rhymes,
Mm,
and a lot of people do, and they're fine with it. I'm kind of like I don't know, a school teacher about it. Like I
yeah.
don't like if you can have an inexact rhyme, if you can have an exact rhyme, don't use an inexact rhyme.
Yes.
So, and I think that most of those old songs, I suspect if you went through them, I think they're all exact rhymes. Anyway, that's one small thing, but I think it really impacted my lyric writing and also my music writing.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like you mentioned on the lyrical front there, but do you think like melodically it changed you or song structure wise? And if so, how?
Um, I think that one of the other sort of accidental gifts that I got is because I never got really great on any instrument. I never got technically proficient on anything. I couldn't modulate. I couldn't switch from one key to another. I could play piano and later on, in my 20s, I started playing guitar. But as a result of that, and perhaps other things, I don't know what, just imagination and the fact that I just walk around and songs pop into my head, but I write music in my head first
Mm,
and then go to an instrument. So as a result of that, I end up with um, unusual. I end up with key changes in songs that I wouldn't have if I was playing an instrument, and bars of 2/4 will pop up here and there just because it feels right in my head.
You
Um,
know, I think that you called it a gift, and it is kind of a gift. I've noticed that sometimes people who are so amazing and technically precise at their instruments, they're almost like wizards at their instruments. They can get really hung up when it comes to songwriting, because it's almost like they've shut off this ability for intuition, because they have to be so technically precise with their instrument. And what you're talking about, writing in your head there, that's almost pure intuition.
exactly. I'm led by something I don't even know what it is, right? I'm just led, and it's all inside me, of course, but it's not that identifiable. It's like
Yeah.
something just occurs to you, right? You don't know why. Um, and yeah, I'm really happy about that in my songwriting, that that's how it evolved. And,
It's really cool. I'm reading a book right now. I should have read this book when I was 18, but here I am almost 40, never read about him before. I'm reading about Socrates right now. And one of his great insights is the idea that learning is remembering, right? And so to hear you talk about songwriting in that way, you mentioned you feel like the song is inside of you and you're just kind of like drawing it out through intuition. It kind of reminds me of that idea. Like writing a song is remembering a song that's already there.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. It's possible. We can't know that, but because I do feel like well, I guess I feel like I'm discovering a song when I write it, and it's telling me, no, you got to keep going. That lyric isn't really right there yet. And
Yes.
the other way songs talk to me, I if a song won't let me go, that's when I finish it because I get a lot of ideas and I don't finish them all.
Hmm.
And my experience of it is that a song is demanding to be written, and otherwise, there's enough songs in the world. We don't need any mediocre songs.
I couldn't agree more.
You want a song with a sense of purpose.
Yes, yes. Well, and I mean, if nothing else, if it doesn't interest you as the writer, of course it's not going to interest anybody else. I mean, it has to light you on fire first before it lights anyone else on fire.
Right, right.
You know. So, what do you think it was? You grow up in this town of Portland, and you mentioned that you always kind of knew that you wanted to get somewhere else, go somewhere presumably bigger, more cosmopolitan. What do you think that drive was, and why do you think you ended up in New York?
Well, I think the other happy accident in my life is that my dad owned cinemas. So
Oh
he
wow.
owned the Little Theater in Portland, Michigan. He also owned a drive-in theater in a nearby town, St. John's. So I was going to the movies um, a lot from a very young age, uh, and seeing the world, right? Because there's a lot of movies that take place in New York and other places, as well as there's plenty of small town movies as well. But I think it just triggered my imagination about what's out there in the big wide world. I mean, plenty of people though didn't leave that town. Plenty of people stayed there very happily, who were also going to the movies. But I don't know. I think I just, who knows? It might have been partly innate and partly just a curiosity about the world. And there was also a lot of pain in my family growing up. So I was interested in moving on, finding my own happiness, and places where I really could feel free to be myself. Because where I grew up, the worst thing you could say about someone or something is that they were different.
Huh.
Like, look what she's wearing. Oh, that's different. you
Yeah.
know, and you move to New York City, it's good to be different. It was the opposite, right? It's
Right.
good to be yourself, be unique. So that was somewhat of an impetus also, I think.
So, what is the New York City that you found on the ground when you moved there? How did you go from one of my favorite movies is that Christopher Guest movie where he says he moved to New York with a dance belt and a tube of chapstick, and that's it. And it kind of sounds like that's how you moved there in a way. What did New York City look like on the ground, and how did you ingratiate yourself into a music scene of some kind there?
Well, it was let's see, sometime in the 80s. So there was some punk that I went to CBGB's. How did well, I came here, I had a job in book publishing. So
Okay.
I came here with a somewhat of more of a foundation than chapstick and a belt. But and I knew two people here, so I had two
Yeah.
friends. But I knew that I wanted to sing because when I was in Michigan, I had a summer job at a dude ranch in the northern part of the state, and the guy who ran it wanted to be a singer-songwriter.
Mhm.
And so I when I got there, I said, "Well, I sing." He said, "What do you sing?" I said, "Well, I sing Summertime and Sunny." Those were the two songs I knew. So I started singing there every Saturday night, and when the because it was like a weekly rotation of guests. They would come for a week and on Saturday. So that's where I got my first taste of I really love to sing and I love to perform. So when I got to New York City and I wanted to sing, I just looked in the Village Voice and started, answering ads for we need a singer.
Mhm.
And I ended up in a band. And then I ended up uh, learning to write songs so my songs could be performed by the band. And
What did that feel like? I mean, that sounds like an almost immediate realization of dreams that you had of not only running to New York City, but running away from some negative feelings that you had back home on the domestic front. What did that feel like to see those pieces start to come together and your plan start to work?
it was so thrilling. I just couldn't believe it. I also had this wonderful little apartment on Cornelia Street, right in the heart of the West Village. So I felt like I was living in the center of the universe. And it was so exciting because I never really expected anything to work out or anything to happen. And and it was it was very different.
Yeah,
Very different from where I came from. But in a way that I loved. I just drank it all in and I still live here.
yeah,
I'm still happy to walk out of my house every day and feel the freedom of I can walk down the street and get a cup of coffee at the cafe.
yeah.
I don't have to get in my car and drive somewhere. And
You,
I think I'm inordinately excited by those things. So
You know what's kind of neat? I mean, you mentioned that early time with your grandmother and getting that taste of Gershwin and the Great American Songbook, and then the New York that you're describing in the '80s. I mean, that's still in some ways the New York of Dylan and the folk scene was just 20 years before. It was still Andy Warhol's New York.
right.
Basquiat is running around at that time. Like, there's a lot of iconic New Yorkers at that time who are now just a memory. But at that time you were still participating in the city. I mean, that's a huge cultural moment there.
Yeah, I didn't have any direct contact with those
Well,
people.
sure, but you were still working within the system that they were, that they
Right.
were a part of.
It was in the air. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
definitely up in the air. And yeah, I met a lot of artists. I met some comedians uh, um early on. And so yeah, there was a lot of new information coming to me. And I didn't start writing a whole lot till probably I mean, I've always been a writer and written stories and stuff, but I didn't do a lot of songwriting until I don't know, I'd been here a good 10 years when I started to do a lot. And then I got a publishing deal, and I had a song recorded by Amy Grant.
I was going to say, yeah. So you had both Amy Grant, I believe the Pointer Sisters
Yeah.
recorded a couple of cuts of yours. So how did you come upon that publishing deal? And were you going to a building? Like in my mind, if you get a publishing deal in New York, you're at the Brill Building, pounding out songs. Is that what it looked like, or
Well,
how did that come to pass?
in my situation, I this band that I joined um, from answering ads in the Village Voice was called Pillow.
Okay.
It was it's kind of an embarrassment now, but we had a lot. We actually had some crazy experiences, but I was offered a management contract, so I had to find a lawyer. So I found a lawyer through one of these other ads I'd answered in the Village Voice, where I made a friend with a musician, and he said, "Well, I have a great lawyer." So this lawyer um, negotiated this contract for me, which of course was never signed. But he said he really encouraged me to write songs. He said, "Write songs. That's really where it's at in the music business." So I started to write songs, and one of those was this song called "Everywhere I Go" that ended up being recorded by Amy Grant. And I wrote it. It's funny because I wrote it about my boyfriend at the time who was Jewish, and she ended up singing
Well,
it.
the biggest Christian singer in the world ends up
Right,
singing it, right?
right.
Yeah.
But it was I was going home from work one day, and this is a podcast about songwriting, right? So it's fun to I love to talk about
Yeah,
songwriting.
go deep.
I had this job at a book publishing company, and I had a boyfriend, and I was waiting for the subway at the end of the day, rush hour, to go home. And I couldn't get on the subway because it was so crowded. And the doors closed in front of my face, but there's windows, on the doors. And in my imagination, I looked through and I saw my boyfriend, who of course wasn't there. Then it occurred to me, everywhere I go, I see your face through the crowd. And that phrase stuck with me, and a melody popped up that went with it. And that's how that song was born. Um, I was answering a different question though. Um, oh,
Well,
how did these things happen? Right.
yes.
So the lawyer um, knew a lot of music publishing companies, of course, because he was an entertainment lawyer, and sent a few. I had written 4 songs and recorded them, and he sent them to what was MCA Music at the time. Now it's Universal. They decided they wanted to sign me,
Hmm.
and one of those songs was presented to Amy Grant's manager, and they loved it.
Just that simple.
Yeah, they wanted to do it. And she actually called me because she wanted to change some of the words
Hmm.
to fit more with her, some in the verses. And I said, that's fine. And yeah, so that's how that one happened. I guess
What a
most of them
trip.
happened through uh, the publishing company. Yeah.
And then also at this time, my understanding is so before Mary Lee's Corvette got going, you were also kind of working as like a session singer for these kind of new folk voices like Freddie Johnston, like Jewel. How did you get into that line of work, and what did you learn from that working in other people's sessions?
Oh, the Freedy session, still one of my favorite creative memories. That I just knew Freedy because we were in the same circle in the East Village. And at that point, my husband and I owned the Lakeside Lounge, and Freedy would play there. And I was playing at Chenet a lot, and Freedy came to my shows, and he just asked me to sing on his record, Never Home. And so I said, yeah. And Danny Korchmar was producing. So I forget what studio it was, but it was somewhere out on Long Island. And we hopped in Freedy's car and we drove out there, and I sang on 2 songs, and it was just magical. Just we all clicked, and Danny, heard in my voice that I knew what I was doing and I could try things. So we just had this wonderful like creative sandbox moment. And then they asked me to come out the next day and sing on 2 more. So that's how that happened. Um, I also was singing commercials from time to time, so I knew a lot of
Really?
session singers. And that's how the Jewel thing came up, because I was one of a group of singers asked to sing on her album. And then funnily enough, I actually met her at the Lakeside Lounge one night. She came down
Yeah.
and just did an impromptu set one night.
What a
And
trip.
yeah, that was the late 90s, because that was when my True Lovers of Adventure album came out. And I'd been to Tower Records, I think maybe that day, and there was a big poster of my record
Hmm.
next to hers. And I thought, well, wow.
Yeah.
And then I met her that night and I told her about it. And she looked at me and said, oh, that's nice.
I know some people you can't get it across sometimes.
Right.
So, can you explain to me then the genesis? So you're writing in a certain sense, you're writing in the background for other people with this publishing deal. You're working as a session singer. Even you said even singing commercials sometimes. How do you go from that to Mary Lee's Corvette when that project starts out and hits the national stage? I mean, it becomes a sensation as soon as it comes out. Tons of press, very glowing press, tons of radio play and stuff like that. How did that project get off the ground, and how did you conceptualize it as a project?
Well, it was born of actually great frustration, because I was writing all these songs, and I also believed in myself as a singer, and nobody was hearing most of these songs.
Right.
Maybe 2 or 3 of them got covered by other people. And around that same time, this little club Chenet had opened, and a lot of people were playing there, and real simple acoustic setups. And I thought, well, if I played there, more people will hear my songs. Maybe it'll be 10 people, maybe it'll be 30 or 40 people a night, but at least more people will be hearing my songs. So that's how that came about. That's how that's how the live performing thing came about. And I'd written a song with a co-writing partner of mine named Steve Butler a couple years before that called Love in Another Language. And there was something about the song that we really wanted accordion on it. And that's before accordion got real popular again. And that accordion player, Joe Chiafalo, was so amazing. And I thought, well, I could do if I play at Shanae, because I wasn't playing guitar yet.
Mm-hmm.
Get a guitar player. For a while it was Steve, and ended up then eventually Andy York, who plays with John Mellencamp for many years now, and Joe Chiafalo, the accordion player. We got together as a trio. So at first I was just doing it under my own name, but there was something about the way the musicians were impacting my songs, and that they would come up with these beautiful parts, counter melodies to my melody. And I just loved it. And I thought, well, this is more than me. I wanted to have it be a band thing. But I was having trouble coming up with a name. I came up with a whole bunch of names, and they were all kind of stupid, except this one I really liked called the Lily Guild. But nobody else liked it. So this is going on. And one day I get in the mail one of those Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes and things, that they used to, I don't know, maybe they still send them in the mail, but it said, Mary Lee Kortes, you have won $75,000 or a free Corvette. And then it had these 3 little pictures of a red, black, and blue Corvette. And underneath each one, it said Mary Lee's Corvette, Mary Lee's Corvette, Mary Lee's Corvette. And I showed it to my husband, Eric Amble, and he looked at it and he said, there's your band name. So, and that's back when we were still sending out flyers for gigs. So I cut the thing up and made a little flyer. It said Mary Lee's Corvette with the Corvettes on it and sent it out. And henceforth, we were Mary Lee's Corvette.
And so you took the Corvette instead of the $75,000 is what you're telling me.
I took the paper Corvette.
Yeah, took the paper Corvette.
Yeah, well, there was some fine print that explained that, I would have to do a few other things to win this stuff. But
well, of course. So the band obviously then goes on, way past playing these gigs for a few people at that club. Was it Shanae?
Yeah.
And goes on to have a whole huge life. What did it feel like to see that band take off and take on a life of its own?
Oh, what was it like? It was, I never thought anybody would hear anything I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that first record came out, I even put a song about a family member on it because I was so sure nobody would ever hear anything I ever did. But yeah, it immediately got a lot of attention and some, important airplay and a lot of coverage in Billboard magazine. And I was so shocked, but also just ecstatic. It was so gratifying to be heard. I just, did not anticipate, I didn't expect anything. So it was, and then to go on, have all these other things happen, like the Blood on the Track stuff and opening for Joe Jackson. And if somebody had told me that was going to happen back when I was, just listening to Joe Jackson and loving everything he did, I would stop lying to me. That's cruel.
Yeah. Well, how did you manage that on a personal level? Because sometimes success is a different and sudden, maybe not sudden success in this case, but success can be a hard thing to handle on a personal level sometimes. How did you handle it as it started to come to you?
Well, I think what for me, the hard thing is like you start to have a little success and then it's not enough, right? Like, well, okay, it's successful compared to this, but not successful compared to that. And so it was hard to be just happy a lot of the time. That was difficult. Personally, I was fine. I was happy doing my gigs and writing songs and knowing that some people would hear them.
Yeah.
It's just all great.
It's a tough dragon to chase. I just saw a survey that said it asked people with a net worth of $500,000, $2 million, $5 million, and $10 million how much more money it would take for them to feel comfortable, and all of them said twice as much.
Uh-huh.
So it's
Oh,
it's
yeah, so apparently there's some simple math here.
yeah, there's some simple for sure. Twice as famous is what I would like every
That's
time
all. I just
we
want to
get
be twice. Right?
just twice as famous. That's all.
That's all I wanted.
Um, so you are a jack of many trades,
Uh-huh.
and um, in the creative world. I've noticed that for many years, either as a sideline or a complementary project, you've worked with what you call music or song therapy. Can you describe how you got into that, and
Oh,
specifically what you mean by it when you talk about something like that?
yeah, sure. I love talking about this. So, I guess it was around 2005. Um, always looking for more ways to make money because, I wasn't making that much money from records at all. But I heard about an acquaintance of mine. Through a friend of mine, we had a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Valerie Gant, who had she'd gotten some funding from the Red Cross to start a music program, a music and art program for families who'd been affected by 9/11. So I approached her and said, she was offering songwriting classes. So I said, I could teach some songwriting because I'd done some songwriting teaching at schools and stuff, but I this was a different context, right?
Mhm.
So she said, absolutely. So I started teaching songwriting to these kids who'd lost some parents or uncles in 9/11. And I get chills just thinking about it. I got to witness firsthand the healing power of songwriting. And part of what happens for people is sometimes you can't talk about something directly. Sometimes it's too painful. If you talk about it indirectly using a metaphor, you know, um, it can allow you to release things and contain it in this thing called a song. Here's my pain, but it doesn't look exactly like my pain, but it makes me feel better because I got it outside myself and I put it here and and there it is. I can look at it, I can listen to it. And of course, just music is happiness inducing, right? Or emotion inducing. It provokes an emotional experience and it can transform you. So I saw these kids get these gifts through their own songs of uh, moments of happiness and relief and a way to express their pain that was tolerable. It wasn't just talking about it literally and in a therapy session having to cry, stuff like that. They could create this thing. And then they had this um this creative product that was theirs that they made that nobody could ever take away, you know. That would never die. So I started calling it song therapy, and there is a field called expressive arts therapy that officially trains people in this stuff.
So you witnessed the effect that the songs was having on these people you were working with. What effect did their experience and their creative work have on your creative work? Obviously, it had to have changed you in some way to witness this and work in that field. How do you think it changed you the most?
Well, it's very humbling, of course. It made me see music as something beyond just myself. And here are my songs, and I want people to hear them. It was sort of what music could do for people and what I could do for other people using music, which is my favorite thing, that it didn't just have to be self-promotional. It could be
Yes.
could impact my life differently. And
And
it's always so validating when you see songs have this power. Uh, it's just made me even more grateful to be a songwriter and a musician to have it in my life.
speaking of songs that aren't about you, your latest project is very interesting. It is all about a woman who actually existed, correct?
No,
No, this I completely misread. I completely misread
no,
your biography here from Missing Piece. I'm sorry. It's
no,
about a
no,
fictional character.
it's not you. It's her. It's not
Okay.
her because everybody thinks she's real, even when I tell them she's not.
Okay, but it's about Beulah Rowley.
Yes.
How did you? Can you describe to our audience who this fictional character is, and but then also how you came up with the paradigm for this idea to write an album in this way?
Yes. So I guess I'll answer your first question first. So Beulah Rowley was a regionally famous Depression era Midwestern singer-songwriter who started writing songs at a young age. And, when she was about, I don't know, 10 or 12, something like that. And she stored them in this wrought iron piano bench that had a lock and key. This was a piano bench she inherited from her grandmother. And her parents both died when she was young. Her father owned a theater. Does this sound familiar?
I was
And
about to say,
she
yeah.
started performing at this theater. Her uncle took
I
it.
thought you said she wasn't real.
Nice one. Well, here's my tagline. Just
Yeah,
because I made this all up doesn't mean it isn't true.
there you
Okay.
go. Yeah,
So anyway, so she's singing at the theater and her life goes on and she starts singing at county fairs, traveling around Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, becoming somewhat known and continuing to write songs and keep her diaries in this piano bench. So there's a horrible house fire one night and she's at home. At this point, she's married with a young daughter. The house catches fire, everybody dies, and the only thing that survives is the piano bench because it's wrought iron.
Mhm.
So over the decades, it goes through flea markets and families till it ends up in my own. And I start learning the piano sitting on that very bench. And the key had been lost, so it was kind of locked shut. And we could always hear this stuff rustling inside it. And on my 10th birthday, my father said to me, "So, Mary Lee, what do you want for your birthday?" And I said, "Dad, open that bench." So we took it to a local locksmith and he figured out how to get it open. And I opened the top and I looked inside and I saw all this beautiful faded handwritten lead sheets and diaries with Beulah Rowley, words and music by Beulah Rowley written on it. So they were, very fragile. I took them out of the piano bench and put them on the piano and started to learn them and decipher her melodies and her words. And I fell in love with this music and I decided I must grow up, become a famous singer and bring her music back to the world where it belongs.
It's beautiful. I never ask these questions, but I have to ask this now that you've described all this. Feel free to not answer this. In your mind, what do you think that locked wrought iron stool represents for you?
Imagination and hope and possibility.
Um, how were you able to follow through on an idea? This must have been you mentioned earlier that you don't finish a song unless something's like really
Right.
tugging at you. Well, this
Yes.
is a whole song cycle. This is a whole
Yes.
album. This thing must have been tugging at you like crazy
Oh,
for you to have gone through and done it.
this started a long time ago. I was on tour in the UK and I was in London and I I was promoting an album and thinking about what's my next album going to be. And oh gosh, this is 2006-ish, I think. And I went and I do other kinds of writing and I thought, well, I'd like to incorporate some other kind of writing into the next album, but I don't know what that would look like. I don't know what that means. So I'm thinking these thoughts and asking myself these questions and I went to bed that night and I woke up in the morning and this woman named Beulah Rowley was in my head. Regionally famous Depression era singer-songwriter from Michigan. And I immediately started writing the song Born a Happy Girl. And Beulah is a name, my grandfather's sister was named Beulah, and Rowley was my maternal grandmother's maiden name. So that's what popped into my head. Like I was saying, where do these things come from? You have some clues, but
Yeah.
Anyway, so there she is in my head. I'm on tour in England and I start this song and wrote most of it that morning, I think. I finished my tour and I came home and I wrote her biography. I
Huh.
wrote the whole story. And then I started to write all these other songs. And I've been writing them over the years. And And, this is just something that would never let me go. And um, eventually I met Hal Wilner. I was working with a manager, said Hal Wilner would be a great producer for this. And this is, almost 10 years after I started writing this stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and or not that long, actually. I actually met him early 2009, but we didn't make the record till 2016. So he heard my early home demos that were very rudimentary, and I had a lot of arrangements worked out with, keyboard sounds like horns and clarinets on the keyboard. And he just fell in love with it. And he was reading the story and listening to the songs, and he turned to me and said, "I've never seen anything like this." And I thought, Hal Wilner?
Yeah.
Hal Wilner, who's seen a lot of things, right? Has never seen anything like my project.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was, I'm still thinking like I'm Portland, Michigan. Hal Wilner's never seen anything like my ideas. So it took us a while, obviously. And that's in between the day we met and the day we got into the studio, crowdfunding became a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to raise some money and make the album. And I continued writing songs up until like 2 weeks before we went into the studio.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just the last song I wrote was How Many Times. And it was born of, he planted some ideas in my head. Mm-hmm. And some other things happened around that time, that this amalgam of things, and that song turned into what it is. And when we listened back to the final mix of that song, he said to me, "That might be my favorite thing I've ever recorded." And once again, silently to myself, I said, "What about all that Lou Reed stuff?"
Yeah, right.
But so it, an incredible experience, of course, and very bittersweet now. I always felt bad that I hadn't found a way to get it released, because at that point I wasn't touring and I hadn't put out a record in so long that there was no label interest and or not enough interest. And I always felt so bad towards him because he really wanted it to get reviewed. He was so proud of it. Mm-hmm. And he used to say to me, "Mary Lee, it doesn't matter when it comes out. It's a timeless album." So that's wonderful. That has stayed with me. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, we thank you so much for coming here on The Working Songwriter to discuss it. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Lee. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, that was a pleasure.